I drove 8 hours through the night just to see my daughter's smile again. But when I walked into the ICU, she was alone, hooked to machines, slipping away. No husband by her side. He was on a yacht in the Bahamas, surrounded by music, women, and champagne. And the money he spent came from her medical savings. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, frozen, knowing I had arrived too late for her. But one thing was clear. He would pay for this, and I would make sure the price was far greater than what he did to my daughter. I didn't sleep during that drive, not even for a moment. I kept both hands on the wheel, my eyes fixed on the dark stretch of highway cutting through South Carolina. 8 hours on the road, just me and the hum of the tires and the old country songs playing low on the radio. I had this feeling in my chest. Not fear, not even worry, just something tight, something telling me I had to get there. I didn't call ahead, didn't text. I just packed a small overnight bag and left. Angela hadn't answered my last few messages, and that wasn't like her. She always found time, even when she was exhausted from work or too tired to cook. It was just after 6 in the morning when I pulled into the parking garage at the hospital. I knew which one to go to. She had mentioned it before when she went for checkups. I walked in through the side entrance and followed the signs to intensive care. I thought maybe she had gotten worse and didn't want to worry me. Or maybe Howard was with her and everything was already under control. But when I reached the ICU and told the nurse her name, the way her face changed told me something was very wrong. She didn't say much, just asked me to follow her down a long hallway. Angela was in room 204. The second I stepped in, the air left my body. She was unconscious, pale, thin. Her skin looked like it had been drained of color. Tubes ran across her face and arms. Machines beeped and hissed. Her chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, but even that looked forced. There was no one sitting with her, no flowers, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I stood still for a moment. Then I walked over and sat by her side, took her hand, and let myself breathe. I asked the nurse how long she had been there. 2 weeks. No visitors. 2 weeks. That was when something inside me cracked, not in the way that brings tears, no sobbing, just a kind of sharp clarity, like someone lit a fuse and walked away. I leaned back in the chair, trying to hold on to something, anything, but my mind went somewhere else entirely. Howard. I pulled out my phone and opened his social media. It didn't take long. The first thing I saw was a photo. Him. Standing on the deck of a white yacht, drink in hand, sunglasses on, smiling wide like he had just won the lottery. Behind him was a woman in a gold bikini and oversized earrings. They looked like a vacation ad. The caption read, "Life's short. Make it count." I stared at that screen for a long time. My fingers tightened around the phone. He was in the Bahamas, celebrating, while my daughter was in a hospital bed, dying alone. And the worst part was, I wasn't even surprised. I had always known Howard was the kind of man who used people, wore charm like cologne, just strong enough to fool you at first, and then it faded. But Angela loved him, and for years I tried to stay out of their marriage. I bit my tongue, smiled when I didn't want to, believed her when she said things were fine. But now, nothing was fine. I sat there next to her, listening to the machines, watching her chest rise and fall. And I started making a list in my mind. Not a list of what to do, but a list of what not to forget. The date she was admitted, the fact that Howard never showed up, the cost of that yacht rental, the name of that woman. I took out a small notepad from my purse and started writing, one fact at a time. No emotion, Just details, cold and simple. Because someone had to remember. Someone had to hold the truth. Angela deserved better than this. She deserved better than silence. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't going to be another heartbreak I swallowed. This wasn't going to be another tragedy where the woman disappears and the man moves on. No. I was going to make him remember her. I was going to make sure the world remembered what he did. And I was going to do it my way. Slow, public, precise. This wouldn't be loud at first, but it would be final. So if you're listening, and you've ever been pushed to the side, if you've ever watched someone you love be discarded like they didn't matter, keep listening. Because I promise you this, he's about to learn what it feels like to be left with nothing, and I will be the one to teach him. By the time the sun had fully risen, I was back at Angela's house. I didn't even remember the drive from the hospital. I just knew I couldn't sit in that room any longer, watching her fade while he floated on open water, smiling for photos. The house was too quiet, too clean in some places and too neglected in others. That kind of imbalance only happens when someone's been living there alone for a while, pretending like they're not. I stepped into the kitchen and opened the fridge. Nothing fresh, just a few takeout boxes and bottles of water. The sink was dry, the trash nearly empty, but the recycling bin overflowed with wine bottles, labels too expensive for Angela's taste. I didn't waste time. I needed to understand what had happened, and I knew I wouldn't get that from sitting still. I started with her office. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the blinds were half closed, filtering the light into a pale grey. Her desk was organized like always. Angela never left papers scattered. Everything was filed or stacked, but one drawer wasn't shut all the way. I opened it. Inside was a folder with her handwriting on the tab. Medical records. I flipped through it. Test results, appointments, referrals. A timeline of her illness. At the back of the folder, tucked between 2 pages, was a manila envelope. I slid it out and opened it slowly. Inside were receipts. The first one was for a yacht rental. 3 nights, departing Miami, billed at $380,000. My chest tightened. The date on the receipt matched the same week Angela had been admitted to the hospital. The next was from a jewelry store in Palm Beach. $92,000 for a necklace and matching earrings. Same time frame, another for a private dinner at an oceanfront resort. Over $12,000. Then a boutique in New York. Custom menswear. $8,000. Paid in full. All of it charged to Angela's account. I sat down slowly in her chair, the receipts shaking in my hand. He hadn't just abandoned her. He had drained her. Every cent she set aside for her care, for her comfort, for her survival, he had taken it all. And while she lay unconscious, he threw himself a party in paradise. I placed the receipts in order by date. Then I opened her laptop. Thankfully, she never changed the password. I clicked into her banking app. The account balance was less than I expected. But I scrolled back through the statements and confirmed what I feared. Thousands gone, week after week, all leading to the same destinations. Luxury, indulgence, escape. There was one final transaction that stopped me cold. An automatic withdrawal, premium life insurance. The amount was large. I opened the policy file. The insured, Angela Callahan. The beneficiary, Howard Callahan. The date of signing, 1 month before her diagnosis. I leaned back, my body suddenly heavy. He had planned this, not the illness, not her suffering, but the part where he came out of it wealthier. He had positioned himself to benefit from her death, not support her through treatment, not comfort her. Profit. That was the word that echoed through my head. I stood up. My legs felt stiff, but my hands were steady. I collected the receipts, printed the insurance policy from her files, and slipped everything into a folder. This wasn't grief anymore. It wasn't even anger. It was strategy. I checked the closet before leaving. One side was empty. His side. His suits, his shoes, all gone. Only Angela's clothes remained, pressed and quiet like they had been waiting. I walked through the house one more time and made a list of what I needed. Documents, dates, witnesses. I wasn't going to report him just yet. Not until I had everything in place. This wasn't about catching him. This was about destroying him. And I would do it piece by piece, starting with the same silence he used to hurt her. I left the house with the folder tucked under my arm. The air outside was warmer now, the morning sun brushing against the pavement. But I didn't feel it. All I could think about was how she had lain there for 2 weeks, alone. No calls, no visits, no one to bring her water or hold her hand. She had given him everything, and he had taken it like a thief in the night. He thought I was too old, too soft, too late, but he had miscalculated. Because now it wasn't just about Angela. It was about all the women like her. And he had no idea what I was capable of when I decided to move in silence. By the next morning, I had packed everything I needed into a single brown envelope. I didn't wait for coffee, didn't eat. I just got back in the car and headed south. The folder sat beside me on the passenger seat. I checked the contents 3 times before pulling onto the highway. Yacht receipts, jewelry bills, copies of Angela's bank withdrawals, the life insurance policy, and the printout of the last email Howard sent to the insurance company just 3 days before I arrived. A short message, no greeting, just a request to confirm that everything would be expedited upon Angela's passing. He called it a time-sensitive matter. It wasn't just cold. It was calculated. And it was going to be his undoing. I had a name in mind. Someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, but who had once told me, plain and simple, if you ever need me for something serious, call. That man was Javier Ortiz. We had served together back when I was still in uniform. Javier was smart, respected, always 3 steps ahead. After retiring, he moved into military financial compliance and then into private work consulting on estate protection and fraud. When I walked into his office, the building looked quiet from the outside, but inside, the atmosphere was sharp. Javier stood up the moment he saw me. No small talk, just a handshake, firm and familiar. He looked at the envelope in my hand and nodded once. We sat down, and I spread the papers across the table. I went through them in order, careful and calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just told the truth. Javier didn't interrupt. He read each page slowly. His mouth tightened at the receipts, but it wasn't until he reached the insurance documents that he leaned back in his chair. He looked at me, and I already knew what he was going to say. He said we needed to move fast. Within 10 minutes, he had logged into a secure portal, typed in a string of numbers, and started calling in favors. I watched him flip from one call to another, confirming cancellation of cards, freezing assets, redirecting future withdrawals into a protected account. 45 minutes later, he slid a document across the desk to me. A list of actions completed, all accounts frozen, all linked credit lines disabled, remaining balances transferred to a temporary trust held under my authority. That was the first breath I had taken all morning. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like correction. Javier printed out a second set of documents and handed them to me. He warned me. Howard wouldn't take this quietly. I knew he was right. It happened just as I stepped back into the parking lot. My phone lit up with 3 missed calls. All from Howard. Then came the messages. The first one was short. "What the hell did you do?" The second one was longer, full of cursing and threats. The third message surprised me. His tone had changed. It was almost soft. Said he was confused. Said he needed access to cover some bills. Asked me to talk. But not once did he mention Angela. Not her condition, not her name, not even a question about whether she was still alive. It told me everything I needed to know. I didn't answer. I turned the phone face down and started the engine. When I returned to Angela's house, I didn't go to her room. I went straight to the study. The door creaked open like it hadn't been touched in weeks. The air was stale, and the light filtering through the blinds made everything look frozen. I started with the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet. Behind old tax folders and instruction manuals, I found a leather-bound notebook. I recognized Angela's handwriting immediately. The first few pages were full of grocery lists, reminders, birthdays. But then, the entries shifted. Each line was dated. Each amount had a note. March the 3rd, $400 for medication. April 12th, $800 for repairs. May the 7th, $1,500 for car insurance. But the more I read, the more the notes didn't match what I already knew. One by one, I started pulling the matching statements from the pile I brought from the house. The $400 listed for medication matched a spa visit in Palm Beach. The $800 for repairs aligned with a luxury watch deposit. The $1,500 matched a hotel reservation in Manhattan. She had written what he told her to believe. He had been lying to her for months, possibly years. And she wrote it down, trying to keep track, trying to be organized, trying to make sense of a world that was being quietly stolen from her. I kept reading. One entry stopped me completely. June the 2nd, $3,000 marked as a security deposit for a future move. But the statement said something else, a private transfer to an account listed under someone named Kaylee James. The same name tagged in Howard's yacht photos. Everything was connected now. The lies, the manipulation, the financial theft. And worst of all, he had convinced her it was normal, convinced her it was love. I sat down in her chair and let the room fall quiet. I wasn't just building a case. I was unburying her life. He thought he could erase it, one transaction at a time. But now I had the evidence, and I had the will. I closed the notebook and placed it next to the folder. I wasn't done yet, not even close. This wasn't about freezing accounts anymore. This was about making sure the world saw what he had done. Every lie, every theft, every cruelty. And when I was finished, he wouldn't be able to walk into a room without the weight of it on his back. That was my promise to Angela, and I intended to keep it. The next time I saw Howard was not in court or behind a lawyer's desk. It was at Angela's memorial, and I planned it that way. I waited until the church filled, until every pew had someone in it. Her co-workers, her old high school friends, neighbors, nurses from the hospital, people who had known Angela her whole life, and people who had only met her once but never forgot her face. The service was quiet, gentle music, a slideshow with pictures of her smiling, growing, living. I sat in the second pew, hands folded in my lap, watching it all pass like a slow wave. Howard arrived 15 minutes late, dressed in black, of course. He made a point to walk slowly, offering soft nods to the crowd, like he was the one who had carried the weight of her final days. I didn't blink when he passed by. I didn't even look at him. I waited. After the minister gave the opening remarks and a few friends spoke, he invited anyone else who wished to say something to come forward. Howard stood. He walked to the pulpit and began speaking in that voice he always used when he wanted something. Low, measured, rehearsed. He talked about how much he had loved Angela, how much her loss had changed him. He even added a few tears, right on cue. I stayed seated. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then a few soft claps, out of politeness, not passion. He sat down in the front row, exactly where he wanted to be. The grieving husband, the showman. Then I stood. I didn't walk to the front, I walked to the side. A small table near the organ held a single screen and a speaker I had placed earlier that morning. I reached for the small remote in my purse and turned it on. The screen lit up. The first image was the receipt from the yacht, dated, itemized, with Angela's bank account number clearly listed. The second image was the invoice from the jewelry store, a necklace and earrings purchased days before her hospitalization. Then came the bank statements, redacted for privacy, but clear enough to show where the money went and when, followed by the life insurance policy. Angela's name on top, Howard's name under beneficiary. People started whispering. Then the audio began, a recording, Howard's voice, laughing, talking to someone about how long he expected Angela to last, telling them not to worry, that the money was already set, that things were moving just fine. The sound echoed through the church. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. When the audio stopped, I turned off the screen and stepped forward. I looked out over the crowd. Some had tears in their eyes, some were stunned, but most looked furious. I raised my hand only slightly. "This is the truth," I said. That was all. Then I turned and walked back to my seat. Howard stood up, his face red, mouth open like he was about to shout, but no sound came. He looked around, searching for someone who might still believe him. There was no one, not even the minister moved. Within minutes, people began standing, not to speak, but to leave, not out of disrespect to Angela, but out of disgust for the man sitting in the front row, pretending to mourn her. Howard followed me outside. His voice caught up before his footsteps did. "What did you do?" I didn't stop walking. I didn't answer. I got into my car and shut the door behind me. The next day, Linda Garvey published everything. Front page, digital and print. Her headline was sharp, "Cold Comfort," subtitled with Angela's name and a short sentence underneath. "Woman dies alone while husband celebrates on luxury yacht using her medical funds." The article included photos, documents, screenshots of transactions. Enough for anyone to connect the dots. Enough for people to realize this wasn't an accident. It was theft. Cruelty disguised as absence. Comments flooded in. People who knew Angela wrote in. People who didn't send messages. There were calls to the DA's office, reports filed with the Financial Crimes Unit. Even the hospital administration released a statement. Howard's office issued no comment. His company website went dark. Within 48 hours, his brokerage license was flagged for investigation. His bank accounts were under review. His lawyer dropped him before the week ended. But none of that mattered to me as much as the silence. For the first time in weeks, I felt it. Not the empty silence of a hospital room. Not the choking silence of a daughter dying without a goodbye. It was a silence of justice, of consequence. Howard tried to call again. I blocked the number. Then he tried to show up at the house. I didn't answer the door. He left a letter in the mailbox, folded, handwritten, as if that made it more sincere. I burned it without reading it. I didn't need his apologies. I didn't need his guilt. He had traded his soul for comfort, and now the comfort was gone. That was enough. I spent the rest of the day going through Angela's belongings, packing her clothes, donating what could be useful, saving a few things I knew I couldn't let go of. A book she loved, a scarf she always wore in the fall. There were moments when I felt the urge to cry, to fall back into the weight of everything. But I didn't. Not yet. I still had one more step to take. Howard had lost the money. Now it was time for him to lose the image, not just as a man who made a mistake, but as a man exposed. I printed the final documents, created a file, delivered it to a contact Linda had at the ethics board downtown. Everything perfectly organized, every piece backed with proof. This wasn't revenge, it was balance. The first domino had fallen, and I wasn't going to stop until the rest collapsed with it. The investigation moved faster than I expected. I thought it might take weeks, even months. But the attention was already there. Linda's article had shaken the town, and the ethics board had no choice but to act. The envelope I dropped off wasn't the beginning, it was the match. Within 4 days, Howard received a formal notice. Misappropriation of funds, suspected insurance fraud, financial abuse. The language was clinical, but the message was clear. He was in trouble, real trouble. They started with his accounts. They weren't just frozen anymore, they were being audited. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every charge was being tracked. Patterns emerged, luxuries billed against medical savings, trips disguised as business expenses, insurance payments misfiled under routine costs. There were too many red flags to ignore. The Ethics Board referred the file to the Financial Crimes Division of the County Prosecutor's Office. I didn't have to push for that. The evidence did the work. Howard tried to spin it, of course. Through his attorney, he claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that the money had been spent during a period of emotional instability, that he had been grieving and reckless, but not malicious. They pushed a narrative of mental strain, of accidental misjudgment. But then came the recordings, the financial timelines, the emails, the audio clip from the yacht, the messages to the insurance agent. It wasn't a man in grief. It was a man preparing a payday. The county filed charges 2 weeks later, 3 counts of financial fraud, 1 count of criminal breach of fiduciary duty. The last one stung. That charge alone carried the potential for prison time. Not probation, not a fine. Time. He posted bail, of course, money from a friend, or maybe a business partner. But the damage wasn't about the courtroom. It was what happened outside. His name was stripped from the brokerage registry. Clients pulled their investments. 2 of his former partners publicly severed ties. The firm he co-founded released a statement saying he no longer represented their values or standards. His photograph disappeared from the company website. He tried to file a counterclaim against me, claimed defamation, invasion of privacy, claimed that I had acted out of vengeance and malice, that I had stolen his property. It didn't last a day. The judge dismissed it before it reached the docket. Because what I had presented wasn't rumor or bitterness. It was verified. And worse for him, it was public. That was what truly unraveled him. Not just the loss of income, but the loss of identity. He had built himself around perception, around charm, the image of a man in control, polished, respected. But now, when people said his name, they said it with disgust. When people saw his face, they turned away. And yet, through all of it, he never once asked about Angela. Not in the paperwork, not in the press, not in the whispers that followed him. He never acknowledged her. She had become an inconvenience to his reputation, a footnote he wanted erased. That alone told me I had done the right thing. I didn't celebrate. I didn't pour a drink or call anyone with the news. I just stood at the kitchen sink one morning, washing a glass, and felt my shoulders lower. For the first time in weeks, my body didn't feel like it was holding back an invisible weight. That same day, I received a call from the hospital administrator. She had read the article. Her voice was careful, deliberate. She said there would be an internal review, that Angela's case was being discussed, that they had found gaps in their communication, that protocols had been ignored. She didn't promise anything, but she said the board was paying attention. I thanked her, and I meant it, because even if they were too late, they were still listening now. In the following days, strangers started reaching out, women mostly, some older, some younger, some I had never met, but all of them carried a version of the same story: left alone, lied to, financially drained, emotionally silenced. Angela's story had opened something, and not just for me. I started organizing the papers again, this time not for court, but for something else. A foundation, something that would take the money still left in her name and turn it into action. Scholarships, emergency grants, legal guidance, quiet help for women with no one to speak for them. It wasn't a monument, it wasn't meant to be dramatic, just steady, quiet. The kind of help Angela would have given without anyone watching. Meanwhile, Howard was scheduled for a preliminary hearing. His lawyer tried to delay it. Cited stress. Said the media had poisoned the public. The judge didn't buy it. The court date held. He arrived looking smaller than I remembered. His suit too loose, his hair thinner. He avoided the cameras, walked with his head down. No sunglasses, no performance. The hearing was procedural, no verdict, just scheduling and documents. But the tension was visible. He wasn't in control anymore. As I sat in the back row of that courtroom, I didn't feel rage or victory. I felt presence. I was there. And he saw me. And that was enough. Because every step he took now was one I had carved. Every door he walked through was one I had opened. Not with noise, but with precision. That was the part he never understood. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to threaten. I just needed to move forward without flinching. And now the world was catching up to him. One form at a time, one hearing at a time, one consequence after another. He wanted silence. Instead, he got me. The courthouse was quieter that day. The reporters had moved on. The headlines had cooled. No more camera flashes, no whispered rumors in the hallway. What was left felt like the cleanup after a storm. Still air, cold light, the work of finishing what had already begun. Howard had requested the meeting. Through his lawyer, he said he wanted to speak with me. Not to renegotiate anything, not to make demands, just to talk. Alone. At first, I didn't answer. I sat with the request for 2 full days before I gave my reply. Not because I needed time to think, but because I needed time to make sure it was my decision, not his. The room was small, no windows, neutral walls, just a table and 2 chairs. I arrived first. I chose the seat facing the door. I waited without checking the clock. He entered looking different than I remembered, his clothes still pressed, but something about the way they hung told a new story. The fabric didn't fit the body it used to carry. He walked slower, shoulders tense, but not strong, just tired. He sat across from me. No handshake, no pretense. We were both quiet at first, letting the silence stretch out between us like something alive. Then he spoke. He said he didn't know what he expected. Said he had played it all in his mind a dozen ways. Said he thought maybe I would yell. Maybe I would cry. Maybe I would turn my back and walk out. I didn't do any of those things. I let him speak because this wasn't about him being heard. It was about him being seen. He said he never meant for it to go that far, that he had made mistakes, that he was selfish, that he had gotten caught up in something bigger than himself. He used the word regret, not sorrow, Not shame, just regret. Then he looked at me and said he missed Angela. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I let the words pass like wind against a stone. I asked him what part he missed. Was it her patience, her trust, her steady belief in people who gave her so little in return? I asked him if he remembered the night she came home from her first chemo and still made him dinner, or the afternoon she sat in the car outside his office, too sick to walk, while he finished a business call that lasted 40 minutes. I asked him if he missed the way she smiled, even when she knew the pain was coming back. He didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the table, like maybe the cracks in the wood would open up and swallow him. I told him I didn't come there for an apology. I didn't come for peace. I came because I wanted him to see what was left. Not of Angela, but of himself. Because everything he had built, all the charm, all the polish, all the carefully practiced smiles had been stripped away. And what was left was a man who had bet against love and lost. He said he didn't know how to come back from it. I told him some people don't. He asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted the truth to stand. I said I wanted Angela's name to mean something more than a tragic headline. I said I wanted him to feel, every time he walked into a room, that the walls remembered her even if the people didn't. Then I stood up. He didn't follow. I walked to the door, hand on the handle, and stopped. I told him he had one thing left he could still choose. He could spend whatever time he had left pretending it didn't happen. Or he could carry it, every step, every day, until the weight taught him something real. He nodded once. Not like a man who understood, but like a man who had no more words to offer. I opened the door and stepped into the hall. Outside, the air felt heavier than before, but not in a way that pushed me down. It felt full, complete. The confrontation wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive, but it was final. I didn't look back. The past had already been seen. It didn't need another witness. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, felt the floor hum beneath me. As the doors closed, I thought of Angela. Not the sick version, not the hospital. I thought of her laughing in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, music playing too loud, her voice dancing through the house like it had its own rhythm. That memory stayed with me all the way down to the ground floor, and for the first time, I let it stay. I returned to the house one last time before handing over the keys. It was quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels hollow, but the kind that feels earned. The air held the stillness of something finished. The walls no longer watched for footsteps that never came. The windows no longer waited for someone to pull the curtains open. I walked through slowly, room by room, not to grieve, not to hold on, but to make sure I had taken everything that mattered and left behind only what no longer did. Angela's room still smelled faintly of lavender. Her dresser was empty now, except for a small box I had almost forgotten. Inside were photographs, neatly stacked, some from childhood, some recent, some of people I didn't recognize. I looked through them without rushing. I didn't need to name every face. It was enough to know she had lived, fully, with connection. I placed the box in my bag and closed the drawer. Downstairs, the light from the kitchen window stretched across the floor. The same light that used to catch her hair in the mornings while she stood barefoot making tea. I stood there a while, letting the memory come and go without forcing it to stay. The car was already packed. Most of her belongings had been donated. The rest divided between family and close friends. I kept a few pieces, not for display, just to have nearby. As I locked the front door, I didn't feel loss. I felt release. The story that had consumed the last weeks of my life had reached its final page, and I had no interest in rereading it. Instead, I turned my attention to something Angela had started, but never had the time to finish: the community grant. I found the draft proposal in one of her files, a modest outline: financial support for women in medical crisis, a focus on those without partners, without families, without voices. It was handwritten, bullet points, a few ideas, a list of potential partners. She had even included names of people she wanted to ask for help. I brought it to Javier, who had stayed in contact throughout everything. He read through the draft slowly, nodding. He said it could work, that he knew a few people who could help structure the paperwork, that if we did it right, it wouldn't just be a kind gesture, it would be a legacy. I started making calls. The hospital board offered to contribute. Not much, but enough to start. Linda offered to write a follow-up article, this time about the foundation, not the crime. She said people were ready to hear something hopeful. Within weeks, we had a name: the Angela Hope Initiative. We launched quietly. No ribbon cutting, no speeches, just a website, a bank account, and a form that could be filled out without judgment. The first applicant was a woman from Kentucky, single mother, breast cancer, no insurance. She didn't ask for much, just enough to cover travel to her treatment center and keep the lights on while she healed. We approved it in 3 days. After that, the word spread. Slowly, but it spread. By the end of the first month, we had helped 6 women. By the third, 18. It wasn't a grand operation. It didn't make headlines. But it was steady, quiet, and it made something broken feel useful again. Sometimes, when I went to the post office, I would see a letter from one of them, a thank you note, a photo of a child, a story of remission. I kept them in a small drawer near the kitchen, not to look at every day, but to remember what mattered when the noise of the world got too loud. One afternoon, I sat on the porch, watching the wind move through the trees. I thought about Angela, not as someone who was lost, but as someone who had left behind a blueprint. She didn't need a statue or a memorial garden. She needed continuation. She needed the quiet parts of her life to be heard by those who could still listen. That was what I had done. Not through vengeance, not through spectacle, but through persistence. Howard faded from public memory faster than I expected. His trial was delayed. His lawyers quit. The charges remained, but the interest waned. He became a footnote, the kind of story people only remembered when someone mentioned the name Angela, and that was enough. He didn't need to suffer forever. He just needed to be unable to rewrite what he had done. I no longer watched his moves. I no longer tracked the case. I had no use for updates. He had become background. I returned to my own life, slowly, gently. I replanted the garden. I joined a book club. I started baking again. Things didn't go back to how they were before, but they moved forward, and that was more than enough. Angela was gone, but not erased. She had been loved, then betrayed, then remembered. And now, through every small act her name supported, she was reclaimed. By me. By the women we helped. By the truth that had refused to stay buried. Not everything in life ends in justice, but sometimes it ends in clarity, and clarity can heal more than punishment ever could. The seasons shifted again before I realized how much time had passed. The flowers I planted behind the porch had bloomed twice. I had replaced the curtains in the living room. The creak in the kitchen step had grown familiar. There was no sudden return to happiness, just a slow warming of the air around me, like a house learning how to breathe again. Angela's foundation had become a quiet force. We had helped more women than I could count now, not in large numbers all at once, but in steady, personal ways, the kind that made the difference between giving up and holding on. Every story came different. One woman needed a flight to get to her surgery. Another needed childcare while undergoing radiation. Someone else simply needed enough to buy herself 2 weeks of groceries so she could rest without guilt. We never asked for details they didn't want to share. We didn't require explanations that cost energy they didn't have. We believed them. That alone was enough. I no longer ran it directly. I had passed the day-to-day operations to a team of younger women. Sharp minds, steady hands. Some had once received help from us. Now they offered it to others. The cycle kept turning. And me. I learned how to be still. The rage had burned through its course. Not because I had forgiven, but because I had nothing left to fuel it with. The fire had eaten everything it needed to. All that remained was ash. And in that ash, something green had started to grow. Howard's name hadn't appeared in my life in almost a year. The last I heard, his legal situation was dragging. Not because it had gone away, but because he no longer had the funds to fight it properly. The firm he once bragged about had been dissolved. His license permanently revoked. His apartment sold at auction. There was no great collapse, just a slow erosion, piece by piece. Sometimes I thought about whether he understood what had happened, not just to his career or reputation, but to himself, to the man he had built his life around. Whether he saw the cost of what he'd done, not to me, but to Angela. Whether the silence he now lived in ever spoke her name back to him. But most days, I didn't think of him at all. Angela had taken up her place in my heart, not as a wound, but as a presence. There was a bench under the maple tree in the back corner of the yard. I had it installed in the spring. A small plaque rested beneath the seat. Her name. No dates, just 2 words. Still here. I would sit there most mornings with a cup of tea. Let the light filter through the leaves. Listen to the sounds of the world going on without us. Sometimes a neighbour's dog would bark. Sometimes the wind would knock over a planter. But mostly it was just quiet. That kind of quiet that doesn't ask anything of you. I started journaling again. Not to write about what had happened, but to mark what still was. I made notes about the weather, about the first day the lilies opened, about the recipe I finally mastered after years of failing. I wasn't trying to move on. I was simply letting life move through me again. One evening, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a short note. No apology, no plea, just a single sentence. I see it now. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I folded the paper and placed it between the pages of Angela's old recipe book. I didn't hold on to it for meaning, just as a reminder that some echoes return, even when we stop listening for them. The next day, I drove to the community centre downtown. They had invited me to speak at a small gathering. Not about tragedy, but about rebuilding, about what it meant to reclaim your voice after losing everything. I stood before a room of faces I didn't know. Some smiled, some looked tired, some looked exactly like I had felt not so long ago. I didn't prepare a speech, I just spoke. I told them about a woman who once gave everything and asked for nothing. I told them about the silence that followed her, and how it tried to bury the truth. And I told them how we refused to let it. When I finished, no one clapped. They just sat with it, held it, let it settle in the air between us. And that was enough. That night, as I drove home, the road ahead looked different. Not lighter, not easier, but open. And sometimes that is all healing needs. Not a perfect ending, just the chance to begin again. The morning I turned 73, I didn't want a party. There was no cake, no decorations, no friends gathered with folded napkins and paper hats. Just the sound of the kettle boiling, the smell of clean laundry folded the night before, and the sun pressing through the kitchen window like it had nowhere else to be. It felt right. Birthdays used to come with expectations. A phone call here, a card in the mail there, a dinner I half enjoyed. But now it was simpler. The day was mine, quiet, measured, unshared. I walked out to the garden before the sun climbed too high. The lilies had opened early this year, 3 of them in a perfect row, white, wide, steady. I stood there with my tea and let the light touch the top of my shoulders. The bench under the maple tree had softened over time, the wood warming to the weather. I sat without brushing the leaves off the seat. I thought of Angela, not because of the date, not because of loss, but because she had always known how to enjoy the in-between. Not the celebrations, not the milestones. Just the ordinary minutes most people missed while looking for something bigger. I stayed there for a while. The mailbox clanked shut around noon. I didn't rush to check it. By the time I walked out, the wind had picked up. The clouds had thinned. Inside the box were the usual things: a catalogue, 2 envelopes, and a small white box with no return label. I brought them inside, stacked them on the counter, and opened the envelopes first. One was from the Foundation's accountant. Routine report. The numbers looked good. Small growth, no red flags. The other was from the hospital's community outreach office. An invitation to join their new advisory board. Not because of the past, they said, but because of the perspective I carried. I left that one open, reread the last sentence twice, and placed it beside the stove. Then I opened the box. Inside was a single key, attached to a tag with handwriting I recognized but hadn't seen in years. It said only one thing: "You always kept your word." There was no name, no address. But I knew. Howard. I hadn't heard from him since the letter. I had not looked for updates. The world had moved on from his trial, from the headlines, from the mess he created and tried to leave behind. But I hadn't forgotten him. I didn't carry him with me. I didn't hold bitterness. But I hadn't erased him either. You don't erase rot. You build new things over the place where it once lived. I studied the key for a long moment. Then I slipped it into the drawer with the others, the ones that didn't fit any door I still owned. That evening, I sat down to write a letter. Not to send, just to write. I wrote to Angela. I told her the lilies bloomed early, that the house still smelled like lemon in the afternoons, that the world she once tried so hard to soften had become just a little softer because of her. I told her about the women who came through the Foundation, how their stories unfolded gently, how their strength reminded me of hers. I told her about the key. I didn't try to make sense of it. I didn't assign it meaning. I simply told her it had arrived, that I had seen it, that I had chosen not to follow it. And I ended the letter with a line she once said to me years ago, before the illness, before the betrayal, when we were just mother and daughter sitting in the back of a diner, waiting for rain to pass. She had looked out the window and said it so casually, I almost missed it. Sometimes peace doesn't look like victory. It looks like survival with grace. I signed the letter, folded it, and slid it between the pages of her recipe book. That night, the wind came hard against the windows, the kind of wind that makes the house creak and sigh. I listened without flinching. It no longer felt like something trying to get in, just something passing through. The next morning, I woke before dawn, made coffee, sat by the window, watched the light stretch across the yard. I didn't feel younger. I didn't feel wiser, but I felt rooted. And sometimes, That is all a life needs to become a legacy. The first frost of the year came early. It covered the porch railing in a thin sheet of silver. The grass crackled softly underfoot as I walked out with my mug between my palms. The air had a bite to it, sharp and clean, the kind that wakes you up without needing to speak. I stood at the edge of the steps and watched my breath rise in front of me. There was a time when cold like this would have made me brace myself. I used to dread the winter months, not for the chill, but for the stillness they brought. The quiet corners of a house that felt too empty, the hours that stretched too long between meals or phone calls. But now, it felt different. It felt earned. I had built a life small enough to hold in my hands and strong enough not to slip through them. Inside, the radio played softly, one of those Sunday morning stations that doesn't try too hard. Just gentle songs and a calm voice between them. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon. A batch of cookies I had baked the night before still rested on the counter, cooling under a cotton cloth. It was an ordinary day. That used to be the thing I feared most. The ordinary. The slow return to routines after everything had burned down. I used to think healing needed to be dramatic, loud, filled with revelation and tears. But it turns out, healing is often quiet. It hides in the laundry being folded, in the dog sleeping near the heater, in the way the floor no longer creaks where it used to. I made a list that morning. Not of things to do, just things to notice. The sound of the sparrows near the hedge, the way the wind moved the shadow of the tree against the wall, the softness of the blanket draped across the back of the chair. I wrote each one down. A new habit. One I had started a few months ago, when the foundation passed a quiet milestone. 50 families helped, some large, some small, some we never heard from again. Others who wrote in just to say thank you. The kind of thank you that came from exhaustion, not etiquette. I didn't speak at the meeting. The board was fully staffed now. Smart women with sharp questions and clear goals. They updated me monthly, but they didn't need my hand on the wheel anymore. I was no longer the engine, just the name on the door, and I was fine with that. One afternoon, I received a letter from the daughter of one of the women we had helped. She had found my address through the center. It wasn't long. Just a folded piece of stationery with a small pressed flower taped inside. She wrote about how her mother had been able to stay home through her final treatments, about how they had spent those last weeks painting together, laughing, telling stories from before she was born, and how, in those moments, they forgot about the machines and the medicine. She ended the note with 6 words. You gave us time without fear. I placed the letter in the same drawer where I kept Angela's, not as a shrine, just as a reminder that even in the quiet, things were still growing. I started walking again, not far, just through the neighborhood, past the same houses, the same fences. The mailboxes leaned the same way they always had. But I noticed more now. The new porch light someone had installed. The small bird bath that appeared near the corner lot. The wreath that changed with each season. I nodded to the people I passed. Some waved, some didn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was the movement. One step, then another, not toward anything, not away from anything, just forward. I had stopped measuring my days by what they produced. I no longer needed them to mean something. I only needed them to be lived. On Angela's birthday, I lit a candle. Not for mourning, but for continuity. I placed it in the window, let it burn down without touching it. No tears, no memories forced, just a steady flame in a quiet room. The years had taken much, but they had left me this. The ability to stand still without feeling stuck. The ability to love without being consumed. the ability to carry without collapsing. And that was enough. More than enough. The attic had waited longer than any other room. I had always told myself there was no need to go up there. Most of it had been sorted years ago. Old boxes, dusty books, seasonal decorations that hadn't been touched since Angela was a teenager. The door stayed shut through storms, summers, and every silent season between. But something pulled at me that morning. It wasn't an urgency, more like a quiet nudge, the kind you only feel when the noise has settled for long enough. So I climbed the steps slowly, one hand on the rail, the other holding a small cloth in case the dust got heavy. The air was dry. Still, the same way it had been when I first packed things away after Angela moved out. Back then, I kept too much. Now, I understood that keeping something didn't mean holding on to it forever. It just meant giving yourself time. The boxes were mostly unlabeled, but I knew what was in them. Childhood things, school papers, cards from birthdays she barely remembered. I moved through them gently, not as a mother searching for memories, but as a woman closing open drawers in her own mind. One box was newer. I didn't recognize the handwriting on the label, but I knew it wasn't mine. Inside were journals, 6 of them. Lined notebooks, plain covers, each one filled to the last page. I sat down slowly on the floorboards and opened the first one. They were Angela's, all of them. Her handwriting shifted across the pages depending on the year. In the early ones, her tone was lighter. She wrote about small things, a book she liked, a class that frustrated her, a moment with a friend that made her laugh. But as the years moved forward, the writing deepened. She began to record thoughts she didn't speak out loud. Her doubts, her disappointments, her hopes that often went unanswered. In one journal she wrote about Howard. She didn't accuse him of anything. She didn't list out the wrongs. She simply wrote about the space between them. How it grew, how she tried to fill it, how it kept growing anyway. She wrote about fear, not of dying, but of being forgotten while she was still alive. I closed that journal and sat still for a long while. She had always been strong, always smiled when it mattered most. But these pages reminded me she had also been alone in ways I hadn't fully seen. I didn't feel guilt. I had done what I could with what I knew, but I did feel something else, a kind of responsibility, not to fix the past, but to carry what it had left behind with care. I kept one journal, the last one. I placed it in the drawer next to her recipe book. The others I packed neatly and placed into a box labelled simply with her name. Later that afternoon, I called Javier. He met me at the foundation office. I handed him the box and asked if he could help archive them, not to publish, not to display, just to preserve. Angela's words belonged somewhere they could be honoured quietly. He nodded without asking questions. Back home, I sat on the bench under the maple tree. The leaves had already started to fall, their edges crisp, their colours deepening. I didn't feel grief. What I felt was presence. Angela had left more than a story. She had left her voice, her reflections, her moments of doubt and clarity. And now I had heard them, truly. And in doing so, I realized something I had not fully understood until that moment. Justice is not the end. It is the beginning of knowing how to live after. And peace is not forgetting. It is remembering without drowning. The winter sun never stayed long, but I had learned to make use of it when it did. That morning, I opened every curtain in the house. Let the light touch the hardwood, let it stretch across the quiet furniture and climb the walls like it belonged there. The floor felt warm under my feet. I stood in the middle of the living room and breathed in slowly. No scent of dust, just the clean stillness of a place that had settled. The kind of stillness you don't rush to change, the kind you learn to trust. On the table sat a letter I had written the night before. It wasn't for anyone in particular, just a page of words I needed to see outside myself. I folded it and placed it in the drawer beside the others. Over time, that drawer had become something of a quiet archive, not of events, but of understanding. I no longer looked at life in terms of what had been lost. I looked at what remained, what had grown, what had quietly endured. The foundation had moved into its own office across town. Javier called occasionally with updates. A new partnership, a small grant approved, a milestone reached. I smiled when he spoke, not because of the numbers, but because of the tone in his voice. The steady pride of someone who believed in what he was building. Angela's journals had been catalogued by a librarian who volunteered her weekends. She said it was the most intimate work she had done in years. Not because of fame or legacy, but because the voice inside those pages had felt close, human, honest. The candle I had lit on Angela's birthday had burned all the way down. I hadn't replaced it, not because I had forgotten, but because its job was done. Some memories do not need to be reignited. They stay lit in quieter ways. In the evenings, I walked through the neighborhood once more. My pace had slowed, but I liked the rhythm of it. The feel of the sidewalk beneath me, the flicker of porch lights turning on one by one, a world gently folding itself down for the night. One house had a wind chime that sang only when the air moved just right. I timed my steps to hear it as I passed. Never the same tune twice. Always familiar. There was peace in the repetition. Not because everything had healed, but because I had stopped expecting it to. Some parts of life are not meant to be repaired. They are meant to be carried. Angela's voice lived in more places now than it ever had before. In the women who wrote to the foundation, in the counselors who sat with them quietly, in the moments of laughter that returned to my chest after so long without it. She was no longer just a memory. She was movement, and I had chosen to keep walking with her. That was the story I wanted to leave behind. Not the story of what was taken, but the story of what remained strong. If this story found a quiet place in your heart, take a moment for someone you love. Light a candle. Write a letter. Or simply sit in stillness and remember. Sometimes, healing begins in silence. And if you know someone walking through a storm, share this story.